The wrench slipped from Rachel's calloused hands, clattering against the engine block of her Kenworth as she stared at the impossible scene unfolding through her rain-battered windshield. 200 meters ahead, illuminated by her high beams cutting through the torrential downpour, walked a woman with two small figures clinging to her sides, all three staggering against wind that threatened to sweep them into the non-existent traffic of this god-forsaken rural highway. Rachel's foot hovered over the accelerator, every instinct screaming at her to keep driving, to leave this potential disaster in her rearview mirror. But then the smaller child turned toward the roar of her diesel engine, and in that fraction of a second, Rachel saw a face so terrified, so utterly lost, that something inside her chest cracked open like ice breaking in spring. Rachel was 58 years old, though the mirror suggested older. 5 years of living in her truck cab since burying her wife had carved deep lines around eyes that had forgotten how to smile. The road had become her only companion, the endless white lines her only conversation. She preferred night driving because darkness hid the monotonous landscapes and left her alone with thoughts that were sometimes more dangerous than wet asphalt. Tonight she was hauling lumber north through the Midwest, hoping to arrive before dawn, but this biblical deluge was forcing her to slow down. She had no rush to get home. Since Margaret died, home was this metal and leather cabin that smelled of old coffee and diesel fuel. Rachel's hand trembled as she grabbed the steering wheel tighter, her jaw clenching with the kind of internal war that defines character. She'd heard enough stories about highway robberies where desperate people were used as bait to steal cargo or the entire rig. Her right foot remained firm on the accelerator, determined to blow past this disturbing vision and leave it behind. After all, the world was full of misery, and she wasn't some kind of savior, just a tired woman doing her job and trying to survive another day without thinking about the empty bed waiting in Pine Ridge. But as the truck approached at high speed, her headlights illuminated a detail that demolished her defensive logic. The woman leading the small group wasn't waving or begging. She was simply walking with a dignity that seemed incongruous with her soaked, defeated state. And those children, they weren't crying or complaining. They were marching in silent formation, like tiny soldiers who'd learned that complaining wouldn't change their reality. Rachel saw the woman's face for just a fraction of a second, but it was enough. An electric shock ran down her spine. She cursed loudly, slamming her palm against the steering wheel, and hit the air brakes. The sharp hiss and squeal of tires on wet pavement interrupted the storm's symphony. The massive vehicle began to slow, stopping about 50 meters from the family. Rachel took a deep breath, knowing she'd either made a reckless mistake or the best decision of the night. She rolled down the passenger window a few inches, keeping the engine running and her hand near the gear shift, ready to flee if she saw a weapon. Through the rearview mirror, she watched the woman from the group sprint toward the cab, leaving the children behind. When the woman reached the window, Rachel saw a face of pure desperation. She was young, perhaps 35, but her features were deeply marked by anguish. Water streamed down her face, mixing with what appeared to be tears. "Please," the woman shouted, her voice muffled by the rain's roar. "I don't want money. I don't want anything. It's just that my kids can't walk anymore. We just need a ride to the next town with a roof. I'm begging you by everything sacred." There was no threat in her voice, only the anguished plea of a mother who had failed to protect her own. Rachel unlocked the passenger door with a sigh of resignation that weighed on her soul like lead. "Get in quickly," she ordered in a hoarse voice. The woman signaled and the children ran over, struggling to climb into the tall truck cab. It was a real ordeal for them. They were weak and slippery from mud. When they finally settled into the space behind the seats and on the passenger seat, the smell of mildew, wet clothes, and fear permeated the small space Rachel considered her sanctuary. The woman, whose name was Elena, held both children close, wrapping them in a shawl as soaked as the rest of their clothing. Elena sat on the edge of the seat, shaking uncontrollably. Not from cold, but from the adrenaline of having found a miracle. Rachel cranked the heat to maximum, shifted into gear again, and pulled back onto the dark road. the silence in the cab was thick, broken only by the heater's hum and the chattering teeth of the twins, Maya and Lucas. Rachel watched the road, but she could feel her passenger's stares burning into her profile. Friends of kindness. Stories, before we continue with this journey that's about to reveal some painful secrets, I want to ask you something important. In many parts of the world, indifference is the norm. Would you have stopped on a dark highway, risking your own safety? Comment below what city you're listening from, and tell me if your heart would have allowed you to simply drive past. Rachel knew she'd broken her golden rule. Never pick up strangers. But glancing sideways at Elena, trying to dry her daughter's forehead with her own soaked sleeve, she knew that tonight the rules didn't matter. There was something about the silent dignity of this family that reminded her of ancient times, of suffering that isn't broadcast on social media. "Here, take this," Rachel grumbled, pointing to a stainless steel thermos and a paper bag on the dashboard. "There's hot coffee and some sandwiches I didn't eat." "Eat." Elena looked at the food as if it were pure gold, but she didn't take it for herself. With trembling hands, she divided the sandwich and gave the larger portions to her children. Then she poured some coffee into the thermos cap and offered it to Maya and Lucas. Rachel observed every gesture through the reflection in the windshield. This act of putting family first, even when your own hunger is devouring you alive, earned Elena the truck driver's immediate respect. Rachel, who had lived surrounded by selfishness at gas stations and warehouses, recognized in Elena a woman of values, someone who had probably lost everything except her honor. "Where were you headed on a hellish night like this?" Rachel asked, finally breaking the ice. Elena swallowed the small piece of bread she'd allowed herself to eat and cleared her throat. "We were walking to Apple Valley, ma'am," she answered in a low voice. Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Apple Valley is 150 miles from here. At this pace, you would have arrived dead or frozen before dawn." Elena lowered her gaze, ashamed of the reality of her situation. "I know, but we were evicted from our trailer this morning after the landlord decided to sell the land for development. We don't have a car or money for the bus. A cousin told me there's apple picking work in Apple Valley during harvest season. We had no choice but to walk." The rawness of the story hit Rachel like a punch. It wasn't a spectacular tragedy. It was the silent, bureaucratic tragedy of poverty, of people treated as disposable. Elena spoke again, her voice soft, almost a melodious whisper. "We told the kids it was an adventure, a competition to see who could walk longest in the rain." She stroked her daughter Maya's wet hair, who was starting to doze off thanks to the cabin's warmth. "But they know. Children always know when their parents are afraid." Rachel gripped the steering wheel tighter. She remembered her own relationship with Margaret's daughter from a previous marriage, whom she hadn't seen in 10 years because of a stupid argument about money and pride. She remembered how she herself had failed to protect her family emotionally, even though they'd never lacked food. The presence of Elena and her children in the cabin functioned like an uncomfortable mirror, reflecting Rachel's emotional poverty in contrast to their material poverty. They were starving, but they had each other. Rachel had a $100,000 truck and a decent bank account, but she was completely alone. The rain began to ease slightly, turning into a steady drizzle. Rachel knew the route near Apple Valley, but she didn't go into the city itself. Dropping this family at the town entrance at 3 a.m. wouldn't solve anything. They'd still be on the street, wet, and with nowhere to go. An idea began to form in her mind, a dangerous idea that went against her solitary nature. She looked at the worn canvas bag Elena clutched to her chest. It was everything she owned. "What can you do, Elena?" Rachel asked, staring at the infinite road. "Besides walking in the rain and taking care of other people's problems, what else can you do with those hands?" Elena raised her head, surprised by the question. "I understand mechanics, ma'am. I used to fix farm equipment at my old job, and I understand carpentry. My father was a carpenter." Rachel nodded carefully, storing that information like a puzzle piece she wasn't sure yet if she wanted to assemble. The truck continued devouring miles in the darkness, but the atmosphere inside the cabin suddenly shifted. It was no longer just shelter from the rain. It had transformed into a mobile confessional. Rachel said nothing more about Elena's skills, but her mind was working at full speed, calculating risks and possibilities. An hour later, the neon lights of a truck stop called Last Mile Diner appeared on the horizon, a place Rachel knew well. Greasy food, strong coffee, and hot showers. "We're stopping," Rachel announced, breaking the silence. Elena visibly tensed. "Ma'am, we don't have money to buy anything. We'll stay in the truck and watch your things while you rest." Elena's humility was painful. She was accustomed to being invisible, to waiting outside while those with money lived their lives. But Rachel shook her head as she parked the steel beast between two other trucks. "Nobody waits in my truck like a watchdog," Rachel grumbled, shutting off the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. "If I eat, my passengers eat. It's a road rule. Besides, those kids need to use the bathroom and wash their faces. Don't argue with me, girl." They climbed down from the truck. The rain had stopped, leaving the air cold and clean. As they entered the diner, the stares of other truckers and the waitress fixed on the strange group. Veteran Rachel, followed by a family that looked like they'd just emerged from a war zone, with damp clothes and muddy shoes. Rachel walked with her head high, daring anyone to say a word. She chose a corner table and signaled for them to sit. Elena tried to clean the mud from her daughter's face with saliva and her blouse sleeve, embarrassed by the dirt in such a well-lit place. The waitress, an older lady named Lou, who'd known Rachel for years, approached with her notepad. She looked at the family, and then at Rachel with a raised eyebrow, but asked no questions. "The usual, Rachel?" she asked. "Yes, Lou. And for them, bring the daily special." 4 plates, soup, meat and potatoes, plenty of bread, and hot milk for the kids. Elena tried to protest again, whispering that it was too much, but Rachel raised a calloused hand to silence her. "Elena, pride is a luxury we poor people can't afford when there are children involved. Swallow your pride and let them fill their bellies. Tomorrow you can worry about paying the debt. Today, just worry about feeding your troops." Elena lowered her head, defeated, and whispered a thank you that sounded more like a prayer than a word. When the food arrived, the scene was touching and beautiful. The children, Maya and Lucas, stared at the steaming plates with wide eyes, but they didn't start eating until their mother nodded. This level of discipline and respect amid such need impressed Rachel even more. They ate hungrily, but with good manners, cleaning the plates with pieces of bread until they shone. Rachel barely touched her coffee. She fed herself only by watching the color return to the children's cheeks and seeing Elena's shoulders relax for the first time in hours. She realized it had been years since she'd shared a table with anyone. Her solitude, which she called independence, suddenly seemed like a cold, empty prison compared to the warmth of this broken but united family. "You said you're a carpenter," Rachel commented as Lou collected the plates. Elena wiped her mouth with the paper napkin. "Yes, ma'am. I make furniture, fix structures, carve wood, whatever's needed. On the farm, I did all the repairs on the barn and fences, but the new owner brought his own team and said my work was old-fashioned." Rachel let out a dry laugh. "Old-fashioned? Nowadays, everything is plastic and glue. Real wood scares people who want everything fast." Rachel picked up a toothpick and chewed it thoughtfully. "And mechanics, how good are you?" Elena straightened up. "Keeping an old tractor running without original parts teaches you to improvise. Ma'am, I know how to listen to an engine and tell what's wrong before even opening the hood. We're taking a break at this roadside diner, Friends of Kindness Stories." Elena's story is the story of millions of craftspeople and manual workers who are displaced by modernity or greed. But true talent never disappears. It just waits for the right opportunity. I want you to reflect. Has anyone ever given you a chance when nobody else believed in you? Or have you been that helping hand? Comment the word opportunity if you believe that destiny sometimes disguises itself as coincidence. And tell me, what state are you joining us from on this journey? Rachel paid the bill, leaving a generous tip, and signaled for them to return to the truck. But before getting in, she did something unexpected. "Open the hood," Rachel ordered Elena, pointing to the front of the massive Kenworth. Elena looked at her confused, but obeyed. The diesel engine, a beast of hot metal and oil, was exposed under the parking lot lights. "I've been hearing a small noise in the alternator belt for the last 500 miles, a high-pitched squeal when I shift into fourth gear. No mechanic at the company shop can find the problem. They say I'm crazy. What do you see?" It was a test. Rachel knew exactly what it was. A worn bearing, difficult to detect with the naked eye. She wanted to see if Elena had an experienced eye or if she was just a desperate talker. Elena didn't ask for tools. She approached the engine fearlessly, not afraid to dirty her clean hands, and began touching the belts, checking tension and slack. Elena's children watched from the sidewalk, holding their breath, instinctively understanding that their family's future depended on this impromptu exam. Elena spent 2 minutes inspecting in silence. Then she pointed to a small pulley at the bottom. "It's not the belt, ma'am. It's this tensioner pulley. It's slightly misaligned, just a few millimeters. When the engine vibrates at certain RPMs, the belt rubs against the metal edge. If you don't replace it soon, that belt will snap and leave you stranded." Rachel felt a thrill of satisfaction wash over her. 3 certified mechanics hadn't seen that, but this woman standing in the rain with an almost empty stomach had diagnosed it in 2 minutes. "Close the hood," Rachel said, hiding a smile under her thick gray mustache. "You're right. It's the pulley." Elena wiped the grease from her fingers on her worn pants with a look of relief. "Want me to try to adjust it, ma'am? With a wrench, I could probably—" Rachel raised her hand. "No, there's no time for that. I need to deliver this load before 6 in the morning." "But you passed the test." Elena didn't understand what test that was, but didn't dare ask. They returned to the truck. This time, the atmosphere was different. They were no longer just charity passengers. Elena had earned her place in the cab on her own merit. Mutual respect was beginning to solidify a relationship that would change everyone's course. Rachel started the engine and returned to the dark highway. 80 miles remained until the exit to Apple Valley, the family's destination. Rachel watched the green signs pass by, debating with herself. Her rational mind told her, drop them in town, give them some money, and move on. Don't complicate your life. You've done enough. But her heart, that organ she thought had atrophied since her wife's death, screamed something completely different. She looked at Maya and Lucas, who slept peacefully in the back bunk, embracing each other. She looked at Elena's hands, restless, resting on her knees. When the sign for Exit 45 Apple Valley appeared, Rachel didn't use her turn signal. She kept the wheel steady and accelerated. The truck blew straight past the exit. Elena noticed the mistake almost immediately. She watched the green Apple Valley sign disappear in the rearview mirror, and panic gripped her chest. She leaned forward, grabbing the back of Rachel's seat, her knuckles turning white. "Ma'am, you missed the exit. That was our town," she exclaimed, her voice trembling, terrified by the possibility that the kind truck driver had suddenly transformed into a kidnapper or a mad woman. Elena hugged the children tightly, her eyes frantically searching for an exit from the locked cab. Rachel didn't brake or turn the wheel. She kept her eyes on the road with a calm that contrasted with her passengers' brewing hysteria. "I didn't miss anything, Elena. I just decided not to stop there. If I left you at that intersection at this hour, with rain and no money, the coyotes or the cold would have devoured you alive before dawn." "But where are you taking us?" Elena insisted, torn between gratitude for the food and terror of the unknown. Rachel sighed. It was the sound of a woman carrying the weight of difficult decisions. "Apple Valley is a complicated place, girl. I've hauled cargo there. The foremen exploit workers, pay minimum wage, and the housing is decrepit motel rooms. You have the hands of a craftsperson and the eye of a mechanic. Taking your family there would be condemning you to repeat your poverty. Rachel slowed slightly to look at her through the rearview mirror. I'm going home. It's 2 hours north in Pine Ridge. I have a large workshop that's been closed for years. I need someone who knows the difference between a pulley and a belt. This isn't charity. It's a job offer. I'm offering a roof over your head and a salary in exchange for you reviving my workshop. The proposal hung in the stale air of the cab. Elena and her children exchanged a look of total disbelief. The offer from a stranger for shelter and employment after 3 hours of travel seemed too good to be true, and life had taught them that when something seems too good to be true, it usually is a trap. Elena, with the protective instinct of a lioness, spoke in a firm voice. And what do you get from this, Ms. Rachel? Nobody gives anything for free. What do you want from us? Rachel smiled sadly at the justified suspicion. I gain peace of mind, ma'am. I gain the certainty that my property won't crumble because I'm too old and too lonely to maintain it, and I gain company. The silence in my house is louder than this engine. If you don't like it when we arrive, I'll pay your bus tickets back to wherever you want. But give me the benefit of the doubt, just for a week. Elena looked at her sleeping children. Maya was snoring softly, and Lucas had chocolate stains around his mouth from the milk he'd drunk. She thought about the apple-picking camps, the mud, the uncertainty. Then she looked at Rachel's broad back, a woman who had given them food and warmth without asking for anything. We accept the week trial, Elena said finally, feeling like she was betting her family's destiny on a single high card. But I want to make one thing clear. I'll work hard. I don't want favors. If my work isn't worth the salary, we'll leave. Rachel nodded, satisfied. Deal. Now get some sleep. The mountain road has many twists and turns, and I need to concentrate. We'll arrive at dawn. The truck roared as if approving the pact, sealed between two women of honor. The rest of the trip passed in a different kind of silence, an atmosphere charged with expectation and fragile hope. As the truck climbed the winding mountain roads, the rain stopped completely, and the sky began to clear, painting itself in shades of violet and orange. Rachel thought about her empty house. She hadn't set foot in her father's carpentry workshop on the property for over a decade. Now she only used it to store old things. Maybe she'd been crazy to bring 4 strangers into her sanctuary. But remembering Elena's look as she diagnosed the engine, Rachel felt a spark of excitement she hadn't felt in years. It was the thrill of a project, of a future. Maybe, just maybe, God had placed this family in her path not to save them, but to save herself. Let's reflect a bit on this. Kindness Stories community. Rachel's decision is risky. Opening your home's doors to strangers requires a faith in humanity that few people have lived through these days. What stops us from trusting our neighbors? Is it fear or experience? I want to read your honest opinions. If you were Rachel, would you have taken the family home or left them in a safe place with some money? Comment the word trust if you believe the world needs more acts of blind faith like this. The sun finally broke through the horizon as the Kenworth turned onto a dirt road, raising a cloud of golden dust. They arrived at an extensive property surrounded by pine trees and ancient oaks. In the center stood a large ranch-style house with a tile roof and wood siding. It was majestic, but neglected. The paint was peeling. The garden was a jungle of weeds, and one of the second-floor windows was boarded up. On one side, a huge wooden and metal shed served as a workshop and garage. "Welcome to Haven," Rachel announced, parking the truck in front of the shed. Elena and her children climbed down, stretching their numb legs, and stared at the place in awe. Despite the evident abandonment, the house had good bones, as a carpenter would say. You could breathe the fresh air and the peace. The children ran toward an old tire swing hanging from an oak tree, laughing for the first time in days, pretending to be pioneers in the Old West. Rachel led them to the main house. As soon as she opened the massive oak door, the musty smell of stale air and ancient dust greeted them. The interior was dark, full of furniture covered by white sheets that looked like motionless ghosts. "Forgive the mess, or rather the neglect," Rachel murmured, opening the heavy curtains to let the morning light flood the space. Clouds of dust danced in the sunbeams. Elena noticed the details: a dried-up coffee cup on the table, a calendar from 5 years ago on the wall, dead plants in pots. She immediately understood that this house wasn't just dirty, it was in mourning. Rachel lived in her truck because the house was full of memories of someone who had departed. "You can stay in the guest rooms on the ground floor," Rachel said, pointing to a hallway. "There's hot water and clean beds. You just need to get rid of the dust. I need to check the truck. Elna, come with me." They went to the shed. When Rachel opened the double doors of the workshop, Elena gasped. Despite the cobwebs and stacked boxes, she was standing in paradise. There was a massive wooden workbench, old carpentry tools hanging on the walls, a lathe, saws, everything covered in rust and neglect, but of exceptional quality. And in the back, a mechanic's workshop with engine tools. "My father was a carpenter. I'm a mechanic," Rachel explained. "This place used to be the heart of town. Now it's a tool cemetery. Do you think you can bring it back to life?" Elena walked to the workbench and ran her hand over the wooden surface, brushing away the dust with reverence. She picked up a rusty chisel and tested its balance, her eyes showing a mixture of professional passion and deep gratitude. "Ms. Rachel, with a little oil, sandpaper, and some love, this workshop could produce the best furniture in the region, and with that money, I can maintain your truck right here, saving you thousands a year in shop fees." Rachel smiled as she observed the change in Elena's posture. She was no longer the beggar hunched in the rain. She was a master craftswoman in her element. However, the moment of communication was interrupted by the sound of a vehicle speeding down the dirt road. A modern pickup truck screeched to a halt in front of the shop, and a person jumped out, slamming the door. The person who emerged was young, about 38, dressed in designer clothes that seemed completely out of place in that dusty rural environment. It was Jessica, Margaret's daughter from a previous marriage, Rachel's stepdaughter. Her face, though bearing the same strong features as her late mother, was twisted in a grimace of disgust and arrogance. She stormed into the shed without asking permission, ignoring the beauty of the antique tools, and went straight to Rachel. "What the hell is going on here, Rachel?" she shouted, her voice echoing through the wooden walls. Then she turned her disdainful gaze to Elena, examining her from head to toe as if she were a pest. "And who is this person? Are you now giving rides to beggars on the road so they can rob what little you have left?" Elena instinctively stepped back and lowered her head, accustomed to being treated as invisible by people like Jessica. But Rachel positioned herself between her stepdaughter and the new employee, chest out, and eyes flashing with fury. "Watch your tongue, Jessica," Rachel warned in a low, threatening voice, making her stepdaughter hesitate for a second. "This woman is Elena, the new workshop manager. She's here because I invited her. This is my house, in case you forgot while you were busy spending my money in town." Jessica let out an incredulous, cruel laugh. "Workshop manager? Please, Rachel. This place is in ruins. Nobody's hammered a nail here in 10 years. You're clearly going senile, and these opportunists are taking advantage of you." Jessica circled Elena, invading her personal space. "Listen, my friend. I don't know what fairy tale you told the old woman, but you won't get a single cent out of here. The property is in the process of being sold, so grab your family and get out of here before I call the police for trespassing." Elena felt shame burn her face. She didn't want to be the cause of a family fight. "Ms. Rachel, maybe it's better if we leave. We don't want trouble with your family," she murmured, searching with her eyes for her few belongings. But Rachel held her arm firmly, preventing her from moving. "You're not going anywhere. The only one who isn't needed here is her." Rachel turned to Jessica. "Sale. What sale are you talking about? I haven't signed anything. I've told you 1,000 times. Haven isn't for sale. Your mother's memories are here. You grew up here." The mention of her mother seemed to harden Jessica even more. "Mom died, Rachel, and you're always on the road. A developer is offering me a fortune for the land to build luxury condos. It's a golden opportunity, and I won't let your nostalgia or your dementia ruin it." Jessica's true motivation came into focus. She saw her childhood home not as a home, but as a real estate asset she could liquidate to finance her lifestyle. The presence of Elena and her family was an unexpected obstacle in her plan to declare Rachel incapable and take control of the assets. "Look around, Rachel," Jessica insisted, pointing to the dust and boxes. "You live like a hermit. You need professional help, not to play house with strangers. If you don't kick these people out today, I'll go to court to file for your incapacity. I'll say you've lost your mind and that you're putting your assets at risk. And believe me, with your history of isolation, the judge will believe me." The threat fell like an ice bomb in the workshop's heat. Seeing Elena's wife and children, Jessica's expression changed from anger to absolute disgust. "Great. You brought the whole tribe," she sneered, pointing an accusing finger at Elena. "I bet they're already plotting to occupy the house by adverse possession. They're nothing but parasites." Elena, who had endured hunger and cold with dignity, couldn't bear this affront to her integrity. She handed her daughter to Lucas and stepped forward, her eyes filled with tears of rage but her voice firm. "Ma'am, we are not parasites. We're workers. Your stepmother offered us a roof in exchange for revitalizing this place that you apparently left to die. Maybe if you visited Rachel more often, she wouldn't need to look for family on the road." Elena's words hit Jessica squarely, hurting more in her ego and the guilt she carried. Rachel looked at Elena with admiration, and then at her stepdaughter with a look of final, absolute disappointment. "You heard her, Jessica. Leave now." Rachel went to a shelf and grabbed a heavy wrench, not to use it, but as a symbol that she was in her territory, in her workshop. "This is my property. My name is on the deed. My sweat paid for every brick. And while I breathe, I decide who enters and who leaves. Elena stays, her family stays, you leave. And if you try that dirty move in court, I'll spend every penny of my savings on lawyers to disinherit you. Don't test me, girl. You know I'm stubborn as a mule." The old truck driver's determination, that strength that allowed her to drive 20 hours straight, emerged with full force. Jessica, realizing she'd gone too far and that Rachel wasn't as weak as she thought, decided to make a tactical retreat. She backed toward her truck, but not without throwing one last poisonous threat. "This isn't over, Rachel. Enjoy your new friends while you can. When the judge sees you have ticking time bombs living in squalor with minor children, Child Protective Services and the police will raid this place. You'll regret this." She jumped into the pickup, tore off in a cloud of dust, and disappeared down the road. The silence she left behind was heavy, dense with fear. Elena sank onto a bench, burying her face in her hands. "I'm sorry, Rachel. We brought this war to your doorstep. We should pack up and leave tonight." Rachel approached and placed her hand on Elena's shoulder, squeezing it firmly. "No, Elena. You didn't bring this war. The war was already here. It's just that before it was cold and silent. All you did was bring it into the open." Rachel sighed, looking at the road where her stepdaughter had disappeared. Jessica has always chased easy money. She never understood the value of building something with your own hands. If you leave now, she wins. And I'm left alone, just waiting to die in some nursing home. I need you to stay. Not just for the workshop, but to prove to the judge, to the world, and to my own stepdaughter that this place is still alive and well. I need us to make this shop shine so bright that nobody can ever say I've lost my mind." It was a plea disguised as an order. Rachel was asking them to fight by her side in the battle for her own life. Elena looked at her children. Maya nodded slowly with that silent courage that mothers have when they know it's time to fight. Then let's get to work, boss, Elena said, standing up and grabbing a cloth to clean the workbench. We're going to make this place so good that your stepdaughter will be ashamed to even set foot here. In the following week, Haven underwent a miraculous transformation. Elena and her children worked from sunrise to sunset. They scrubbed, fixed, painted, and lubricated everything in sight. The sound of saws and hammers echoed through the valley once again. The children helped by weeding the garden and even started a small vegetable patch with tomatoes and corn, dreaming of their first backyard barbecue. And for the first time in years, Rachel slept in a real bed and ate home-cooked meals, like Elena's famous apple pie, made from scratch. But the shadow of Jessica's threat still hung over them. Just as they were finishing the front door, a police cruiser and a car from a city official stopped at the driveway entrance. The official car parked right next to Jessica's pickup. Two social workers emerged with folders under their arms, followed by a police officer who looked extremely bored. Jessica, who had arrived minutes earlier to stage the scene, greeted them with a triumphant smile. "There they are!" she shouted, pointing an accusing finger at Elena and the children playing on the porch. "Exactly as I said in the report. Illegal squatters, children at risk, and a senile old woman who can't take care of herself." Rachel came out of the house, wiping her hands on a cloth with a calm that completely surprised the officials. She didn't yell. She didn't run. She simply stood there, in her newly varnished doorway, flanked by Elena and her children. "Good morning, officer. To what do we owe the honor of this visit, especially without a warrant?" Rachel asked, her voice firm as rock. The social worker, a woman with a stern countenance, adjusted her glasses. "Ms. Rachel, we received a serious report about living conditions here, as well as your mental health." "Well, come in then. See for yourselves," Rachel invited, opening the door wide. Jessica expected to see chaos and the filth from last week, but upon entering, she was left speechless. The house wasn't in ruins. It smelled of beeswax and fresh bread and flowers. The furniture was arranged, the floors gleamed, and there wasn't a single grain of dust. Elena had transformed that mausoleum into a welcoming, dignified home, even adding patriotic touches like an American flag at the fireplace. The social worker walked through the rooms, checked the fully stocked kitchen, and saw the children clean, well-dressed in clothes Rachel had bought in town, and quietly doing homework at the dining table. "Where exactly is the risk, Ms. Jessica?" the official asked, clearly irritated that they were wasting her time. "This is a perfectly acceptable, functional home. In fact, it's better maintained than many of the houses I visit." Jessica, desperate seeing her plan crumble, changed tactics. "It's all a facade. Rachel is crazy. She picked up these vagrants off the street. I bet they're drugging or manipulating her." Rachel walked to an antique desk and pulled out a leather folder. "Girl, you underestimate yourself and certainly underestimate me," she said, with a coldness that froze the room. "I knew you'd come here with this story. That's why I went to town yesterday. Here's a mental health certificate signed by the regional hospital's chief psychiatrist, and a notarized sworn statement naming Elena as my property manager and resident employee, with a legal contract." Rachel handed the papers to the officer. "These vagrants are my employees and my guests. You, Jessica, are the only trespasser here." The officer examined the documents and nodded. "Everything appears to be in order, Ms. Jessica. Filing false reports with social services is a serious crime. I suggest you leave now before I decide to take you to the station for harassment and wasting public resources." Jessica's humiliation was absolute before the strangers she despised. Her own stepmother had beaten her using the exact same laws she'd tried to weaponize. Jessica stared at Rachel with hatred, but also with a new kind of fear. The old truck driver wasn't an easy target. "You'll regret this, Rachel. When they steal everything you have, don't come crying at my door." Rachel looked at her with sadness, not anger. "I won't, girl, because I've already found my family. They may not have my blood, but they have my honor." Jessica stormed out of the house, jumped into her pickup, and tore off, disappearing forever from Rachel's life. When the dust settled and the police left with their apologies, a silence of absolute relief took over Haven. Elena collapsed into a chair and wept copiously, finally releasing days of pent-up fear. Elena hugged Rachel. It was an awkward embrace, but filled with immense gratitude. "I thought you'd throw us out to save yourself, boss," Elena confessed. Rachel patted her back. "Elena, you fixed my truck engine and the engine of my life. I would never throw you out. Now dry those tears. We have a furniture order to finish. The folks in town are raving about your work." With Jessica out of the way, Haven prospered. What began as an improvised workshop transformed into a carpentry and mechanic shop for travelers. The combination was unusual but effective. Truckers would stop to fix their engines and end up buying handcrafted furniture for their wives, or even custom gun racks for their pickups. Elena proved to be a wood genius, creating unique pieces that soon had a waiting list. Rachel stopped driving long distances. She sold the old truck and bought a delivery van for the furniture. Her new route was short, but full of satisfaction. She spent afternoons teaching Maya to carve wood and Lucas to care for the garden, becoming the grandmother she could never be to Jessica's children, and sharing stories of classic road trips across the United States. 5 years passed. Haven was no longer an abandoned house. It was the heart of the community. Elena managed the finances with impeccable efficiency. She had 2 assistants in the workshop. And Rachel aged, yes, but she didn't fade. Each wrinkle on her face now came from a smile, not worry. On a rainy afternoon, just like the night they met, Rachel sat on the porch with Elena to watch the rain. "That night, I almost kept driving," Rachel confessed, staring at the storm. "I almost accelerated and left you all behind. What a mistake that would have been. I would have died alone in that freezing cab." Elena smiled as she sanded a wooden toy. "But you stopped, Rachel. That's what matters. You stopped when nobody else would." Rachel passed away peacefully in her bed on a winter night, surrounded by Elena, Maya, and Lucas. There was no loneliness, no fear. Her will was simple and clear. Haven and all its assets went to Elena and her children, with a special clause creating a scholarship fund for Maya and Lucas. For Jessica, she left only one thing, her old empty toolbox with a note that read, "So you can learn to build your own life instead of trying to steal it from others." It was a final lesson from a woman who, until the end, tried to teach values, even if she had to be harsh. The story of Rachel and the Rain family became a local legend. It teaches us that family isn't defined by DNA, but by loyalty and mutual care. Rachel saved Elena from poverty, but Elena saved Rachel from loneliness. They rescued each other. It reminds us that sometimes the unexpected detours on life's road, those moments when we decide to break and help a stranger, are what lead us to our true destiny. True wealth isn't found in selling land, but in shared dinners, in the noise of the workshop, and in children's laughter filling an empty house. Thank you for joining us on this journey of transformation and hope here at Tales of Kindness. We hope Rachel's story inspires you to keep your eyes open on your own path. You never know when your decision to help might change someone's world, including yours. If this story touched your heart, we have a small request. Type the word loyalty in the comments and share this video with someone who needs to remember that there are still good people in this world. Subscribe for more stories that feed the soul. And remember, when you see someone walking in the rain, don't speed up. They might be carrying the miracle you were waiting for.